Hi. I'm Ajara Delaney. For years, I scrubbed the floors in a building where my own words were printed under someone else's name. My sister called me the illiterate janitor right before she poured coffee over the work I spent weeks translating. She didn't know the boardroom had cameras. She didn't know I had proof. She definitely didn't know I was walking into that same room the next day, not with a mop, but with a nameplate. They laughed at me until they stood for me. But the question I still ask myself is this: how many other people like me are still in the shadows, waiting to be seen? I still remember the smell of burnt coffee that morning, sharp and bitter, cutting through the stale air of the boardroom before anyone even said a word. It's strange, the things your mind chooses to keep, the smell, the flicker of laughter, the sound of a paper cup collapsing under someone's hand. That's what stuck with me, not the meeting notes or the names of the executives who looked away when it happened. I was wiping the conference table, my reflection broken up by streaks of cleaner and sunlight. The morning light was unforgiving, bouncing off every polished surface. I had just set a small stack of neatly printed pages, my translation, at the corner of the table when Callista walked in. She didn't knock. She never does. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks, sharp, deliberate. "You missed a spot," she said, not looking at me but at her own reflection in the glass wall. I didn't answer. The rule of survival in this building was simple: speak only when spoken to, and even then, make it short. Callista stopped by the chair at the head of the table, the one she always claimed was hers. She glanced down at the papers, her lips curling into something between amusement and disdain. "What's this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "It's a draft," I said softly, "for the Mandarin proposal. I thought maybe—" Before I could finish, she picked up her coffee cup, still half full, and tilted it over the stack. The dark liquid spilled across the pages, soaking the ink, curling the edges. The smell rose again, stronger this time. She laughed. Not the kind of laugh that fills a room, but the kind that empties it. "Illiterate janitor," she said, and the words hit harder than the coffee ever could. A few executives chuckled nervously, glancing at one another. One of them said, "Guess that's one way to do a rewrite." The room filled with the awkward noise of people pretending not to enjoy cruelty. I could feel the heat rising behind my ears. Every instinct screamed to say something, to scream, maybe, but instead, I picked up a towel and began blotting the mess. My hands moved on their own. "Clean first, feel later." Callista turned to leave, tossing her words over her shoulder like ashes. "Next time, stick to wiping tables, little sister. Translations for people who actually finished college." The door closed behind her, and the laughter faded with it. For a moment, the only sound left was the drip of coffee hitting the floor. That's when I realized, no one was going to help me. Not the interns who looked away. Not the managers pretending to read their phones. Not even the ones who once told me they admired my humility. In this place, silence was safety. I folded the wet pages and slipped them into my cleaning cart, between a bottle of disinfectant and a roll of paper towels. By noon, the meeting was over, and the same people who laughed at me walked out chatting about diversity initiatives. I wiped the table again, this time slower, watching the sunlight shift across the room. The stain was gone, but the smell lingered. That evening, I clocked out and walked to the break room where the other night staff gathered. Mrs. Hensley, the oldest among us, handed me half of her sandwich. "Eat, honey," she said. "You can't fight on an empty stomach." I smiled, but it felt more like a grimace. On the company's internal feed, Callista's photo filled the screen. "Congratulations to our Director of Communications for leading the successful multilingual outreach project." The caption beneath it read, "Bridging cultures, one word at a time." My throat tightened. That was my line. My tagline. I closed the app and stared at the vending machine's reflection of my face, hair pulled back, uniform wrinkled, name tag smudged. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Later that week, I was called to assist with catering for another event upstairs. They were hosting a luncheon for visiting investors, and the conference room looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine: fresh flowers, crystal glasses, silver trays. Callista was there again, dressed in a pale blue suit that made her eyes look even colder. She caught sight of me arranging the coffee station and smiled with that same syrupy tone she reserved for pity. "Ajara," she said, "sit over there. By the copier. You'll be out of the way." I froze for a second. The guests turned to look, curious about who she was talking to. A couple of them gave polite, confused smiles, unsure whether to laugh. "Sure," I said, forcing a steady voice. I took the folding chair and set it down beside the copier, exactly where she told me to. It wasn't the first time I'd been told where to sit. As I sat there, the hum of the machine beside me became a kind of metronome. Every copy it spat out felt like an echo of something I'd lost: my degree, my job offers, my father's pride. I remembered a dinner years ago, before everything fell apart. Callista had just gotten her first promotion, and Dad raised a glass to her. "You're doing great things, kiddo," he'd said. Then he turned to me with a smile softer but quieter. "And you, keep learning. The world needs people who listen before they speak." Back then, I didn't realize how easily silence could be mistaken for weakness. When the luncheon ended, Callista walked past me without a glance. Her perfume trailed behind her, expensive, floral, suffocating. I gathered the empty cups and leftover pastries, packed everything back into the cart, and took one last look at the spotless table. By the time I left the building, the sky had shifted from gold to gray. Charlotte's streets were still warm from the afternoon sun, but the air carried a hint of coming rain. I walked the 2 blocks to the bus stop, clutching my coat tighter. The city's hum filled the silence, the traffic, the distant music from a bar, someone arguing over the phone nearby. All of it blurred into background noise. When I got home, the apartment was quiet except for the soft wheeze of the old ceiling fan. Mom was asleep in her recliner, a blanket pulled up to her chin. The TV murmured a rerun of some 90s sitcom. I tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders and sat beside her. The coffee stain had dried on my uniform, faint but visible. I stared at it for a long time, tracing its shape like a bruise. That night, I pulled out the ruined pages and laid them flat on my kitchen table. The ink had bled into strange shapes, unreadable now. I took a pen and began rewriting the first line. Maybe it was muscle memory. Maybe it was defiance. But the words came easier this time. I didn't hear the thunder outside until the first raindrop hit the window. I kept writing. By midnight, I'd finished retyping the first 3 pages. My hands ached, but it was a good ache. The kind that told you were still alive. I looked at the clock, 12:07 a.m. I should have gone to bed hours ago, but something inside me refused. Tomorrow, I'd have to walk into that same building again. I'd have to pass her desk, hear her laughter, smell that same coffee. But for the first time in a long while, the thought didn't make me shrink. I gathered the papers, slid them into a clean folder, and whispered to the empty room, "This isn't forever." I meant it. I didn't sleep much that night. After rewriting the first few pages of my translation, my mind kept spinning, thoughts circling like moths around the bare kitchen bulb overhead. Even after I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, sleep stayed just out of reach. By the time my alarm buzzed at 6:15, I was already up, sitting by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea, watching the city stir itself awake. It was a Monday, but not just any Monday. I'd finally decided to send the full translation, anonymously, to the communications team. Not because I expected thanks. God knows I'd stopped expecting that a long time ago. But part of me still hoped someone might notice. Maybe they'd realize the work came from someone inside the building. Maybe I'd get a seat at the table, or at least a chair that didn't fold. I opened my laptop, attached the document, and sent it to the internal shared inbox, language.team@reevesenterprises.com. I didn't sign my name. Just left the subject line blank. Let the work speak for itself. Around noon, while restocking the executive kitchen on the 11th floor, I heard voices coming from the glass conference room. I kept my head down, wiping down the counter and organizing the coffee pods like nothing was happening. But my ears caught every word. "Incredible fluency," someone said. "Oh, absolutely," another chimed in. "The technical detail, the tone, it reads like it came from a native." Then I heard it. Callista's voice, smooth as ever. "Took me all weekend," she said. "You wouldn't believe how long it takes to translate something properly when you're fluent in 3 languages. I had to adjust a few phrases to make them sound more authentic." I froze. My hands clutched a box of stir sticks too tightly, and the plastic cracked beneath my grip. "She always was a perfectionist," someone chuckled. "Unlike your sister, huh?" The words floated in the air like smoke. "Bet your sister can't even spell Mandarin." Laughter. Short, but enough. I didn't move. I waited for the voices to fade, the room to empty. Then I walked over to the glass wall and looked inside. My printed document, my formatting, my phrasing, was on the presentation screen. Slightly edited. The title changed. A different footer. But it was mine. I walked away without a word. That night, I went home and sat quietly beside Mom. She was watching reruns of some hospital drama, half awake. I had wrapped her birthday gift carefully, a hand-annotated poetry collection with translations in Mandarin and English, poems we used to read together before her illness had dulled her memory. "I brought something for you," I said, handing her the package. She smiled, frail hands unwrapping the tissue paper. Just as she opened it, the front door clicked open. Callista's heels hit the floor like they owned it. "Hope I'm not too late," she said brightly. "Happy birthday, Mama." She walked over, holding the same book. Rewrapped in glossy paper with gold trim. I stared, my mouth slightly open. "No way," Mom gasped, hugging her. "You remembered our poems. You used to read them to me every night when you were little." "No, she didn't," I said before I could stop myself. Callista shot me a glance. "Of course I did. You probably don't remember, she was always in her room." She handed Mom the card. I recognized it immediately. The handwriting was mine. Except she'd scratched out the name at the bottom. Mom didn't notice. She just kept smiling. I didn't say anything else. After dinner, I helped Mom to bed and returned to the living room. Callista was already scrolling through her phone, stretched across the couch like she owned the place. "You have some nerve," I said quietly. She didn't look up. "I have some skill. That's the difference." "You stole my translation." "Don't be dramatic. You didn't sign it. Could have been anyone. And even if it was you, honestly, what were you going to do with it? Staple it to the mop bucket?" That one hit. But I didn't show it. "You used the card I wrote. For Mom." She shrugged. "She doesn't know the difference. She thinks I used to read her bedtime poetry. I'm just giving her what she wants to remember." "She wants to remember something that never happened." "Exactly," she said. "Which means it doesn't matter who did what. People remember stories, Ashura, not facts." It wasn't the first time she said something like that. But tonight, it landed differently. After she left, I went to my room and pulled out a shoebox from the back of the closet. Inside, tucked between old journals and scholarship rejection letters, was a medal. A spelling bee award. I was 8. I'd won first place in the county competition. Came home with my certificate and this little gold medal on a red ribbon. Callista had thrown it in the trash that night. Said it was cute that I cared so much about nerd stuff. I'd fished it out later and buried it in the yard behind our apartment building. A few months ago, I dug it up, cleaned it, and kept it in the box. She'd always been like this. She didn't want me to fail. She needed me to stay invisible. Because if I wasn't invisible, she wasn't special. I sat at my desk and opened the folder where I'd saved the original translation. I pulled up the copy she had submitted, the one being praised across the company. I began circling the differences. Subtle changes. Word swaps. Lines she didn't understand, so she rewrote them incorrectly. There it was. Line after line. My voice muted, then replaced. I printed the 2 documents, highlighted every discrepancy, and slipped them into a new envelope labeled, Truth. If she wanted to play games with language, then she should know, I invented the board. The morning after printing the evidence, I woke to the sound of birds outside my apartment window. I hadn't realized how early it was until the light began to creep through the blinds. The city was still quiet, too early for traffic, too early for noise. I made coffee and poured it into the same chipped mug I'd had since college. Maybe that was my way of holding on to who I used to be, the girl who still believed hard work spoke louder than people like Callista. By 9, I was sitting on the sofa with Mom, sorting her morning medication into the weekly pill organizer. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried to help. I let her, even though it took twice as long that way. Some things were worth the patience. "Hand me the blue one, Callista," she said suddenly, her voice light, unbothered. The sound of that name dropped into the room like a rock into water. I froze. My hand hovered above the small white pill. Mom blinked up at me, confused by my stillness. "What's wrong? You meant me, right?" She frowned, then her expression softened into embarrassment. "Oh, Azura, honey, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. You two are always on my mind. I nodded. It's okay, Mom. But it wasn't. The truth was, I'd spent my entire life being mistaken for someone else, by strangers, by teachers, sometimes even by my own family. But hearing it from her now, when her memory was already slipping away, hurt in a way I couldn't explain. It was like losing myself twice, once to her illness, and again to Callista's shadow. I smiled anyway, because that's what good daughters do. Let's finish this, okay? As I placed the last pill in the box, she patted my hand. You're such a good girl. Just like your sister. The words should have rolled off me by now, but they didn't. Later, I cleaned up the kitchen, letting the sound of running water drown out my thoughts. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in years. Crying felt too much like permission, like admitting defeat. Instead, I wiped down the counter, folded the dish towel, and set everything in its place. When I stepped outside, the air carried a hint of last night's rain. The world looked washed clean, though I didn't feel that way. I walked the few blocks to the small park behind our apartment building. It wasn't much, just a few benches, an oak tree, and the steady hum of distant traffic, but it was where I went when I needed to think. I sat on the same bench where my father used to read the newspaper on Sundays. I could still see him in my mind, glasses sliding down his nose, his thermos beside him, muttering corrections to articles like he couldn't help himself. He'd always tell me, words matter, Azura. They build worlds or they burn them down. Be careful which you choose to light. He'd said that the day I won my first spelling bee. I remembered the pride in his eyes as he pinned the red ribbon on my shirt. Then Callista had stepped into the kitchen, frowning. You know it's just a spelling contest, right? Not like she cured cancer. Mom had laughed then, thinking it was just sibling teasing. Dad hadn't laughed. He'd turned to Callista and said, every victory counts when you earn it. That night, I found the medal in the trash. Back in the present, I took a deep breath and walked toward the edge of the park, near the old oak tree. The ground was soft from rain, the soil dark and damp. I knelt, digging gently with my hands until my fingers hit something solid, a small tin box, rusted along the edges. I wiped the dirt away and opened it. Inside lay the medal, still attached to its faded red ribbon. I held it up to the sunlight, and for a moment, it gleamed the way it used to. You didn't take this from me, I whispered. I gave it away. I closed the box again and stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. But not anymore. On the walk back home, I stopped by a small thrift store near the bus stop. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, greeted me. Back again, Miss Azura? You've got a collector's eye. Something like that, I said, smiling faintly. I bought a simple shadow box frame, knowing exactly what I'd put inside it. Later that afternoon, I hung the medal on my living room wall. It wasn't about pride, it was proof. Proof that I existed, that I had earned something on my own before life bent me into silence. The next morning at work, I kept my head down and did my usual routine, restocking supplies, cleaning meeting rooms, setting up the catering tables for the executives. I moved quietly, invisible as always, until Callista appeared in the hallway. She was on her phone, laughing softly. The sound scraped against my patience. When she noticed me, she lowered the phone and picked up a file from the counter. Thanks for doing the grunt work on this, she said, her voice sugar-coated. Some of us have more important things to focus on. I looked up at her and smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that carries truth beneath it. Grunt work builds foundations. Show me what you've ever built. For a split second, her face tightened, like she'd been caught off guard. Then she smirked and walked away, pretending it hadn't landed. But I knew it had. People like her don't expect quiet people to talk back. After she disappeared into her office, I exhaled slowly and returned to my duties. Each movement felt deliberate, measured. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat at my desk, the small lamp casting a warm circle of light over my laptop. I opened a new document titled Mandarin English Technical White Paper, Authorship Comparison. I uploaded 2 files, mine and hers. Then I began annotating. Line by line, phrase by phrase. Each correction was a reclaiming. Every note was a small defiance. My thoughts drifted to Mom, to the way she said my sister's name earlier. Maybe it wasn't her fault. Maybe she simply remembered what she'd been shown, the daughter who performed, who smiled, who took credit for everything in reach. But I'd spent my life building what couldn't be seen: words, work, resilience. I wasn't the child in the corner anymore. As the hours passed, the sound of my typing filled the small apartment. Midnight came and went. I took a sip of cold coffee, then leaned back in my chair. The comparison file was almost complete, rows of color-coded highlights proving every piece of what I already knew. I stared at the screen, exhaustion settling into my bones but satisfaction keeping me awake. If she erased my name, I whispered, saving the document, I'll write it back in bolder. Morning arrived heavy and gray, the kind of day that made everything feel a little slower, a little heavier. I got to work earlier than usual, hoping the quiet building would help me focus on the comparison report I was still polishing. The office before 8 felt like another world: no noise, no gossip, just the low hum of lights and the faint smell of burnt coffee from the overnight shift. I almost liked it that way. By 9, the building was alive again. Doors slamming, heels clicking, people rehearsing fake smiles before their meetings. I carried a tray of coffee cups into the executive lounge, keeping my steps soft and my head down. That's when I saw her. Callista stood by the window, leaning against the counter, phone in one hand, cappuccino in the other. The skyline framed her perfectly, like a portrait of confidence and control. She didn't look up when she said, "You really shouldn't sneak around here so early, Azura. People might start thinking you actually work here." I set the tray down carefully. "You should be careful what you think people notice," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp, assessing. "Excuse me?" I didn't flinch. "If you keep using my words, I'll show them whose voice they're really hearing." For a moment, the air tightened between us. She stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the cup. Then she smiled, slow, calculated. "You sure you want to do that?" she said softly. "I mean, Mom's immigration paperwork is barely holding. Would be such a shame if someone poked around and found irregularities." I stopped breathing for half a second. She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "What did you just say?" I managed. She shrugged. "Just a thought. You know how these government databases are, one wrong keystroke and poof, people vanish. I'd hate for Mom's green card renewal to get lost in the shuffle." I could barely speak. "You wouldn't dare." Callista met my gaze, unblinking. "Don't test me, little sister." She smiled again and took a long, slow sip. "You're smart enough to know how this works. Everyone has leverage. Even you." Then she picked up her phone and walked out, leaving her cup half full on the counter. I stood there, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. She knew exactly where to cut. She always had. I left the lounge and walked down the hall, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I found an empty supply closet, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it. The air inside was warm and stale, the shelves stacked with cleaning supplies. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. "She knows where to hit because she's always known where I bleed," I whispered. I pressed a hand against my chest, counting the beats until the shaking stopped. My mother was all I had left. Every time Callista attacked me, it wasn't about the job or the work, it was about control. And if she couldn't control me, she'd control the one person I couldn't protect from her. But I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. When I finally walked back to my desk, my face was calm, my body steady. On the outside, I looked like the same quiet employee, invisible and obedient. But inside, something was shifting. My silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was strategy. That afternoon passed in a blur of small tasks and background noise. At 5 o'clock, most of the staff left, the building slowly emptying. I stayed behind, finishing up the final edits to a translation project for the finance team. The office at night felt almost peaceful, the hum of the HVAC system like white noise against the clicking of my keyboard. At 11:58 p.m., just as I was saving my work, an email popped up, deadline change notice. I frowned. The message looked official, sent from an internal address, but something was off. It said the report I was submitting, originally due next Friday, was now expected by 9 a.m. tomorrow. 9 hours. I checked the timestamp, then my inbox. The original message confirming next week's deadline had vanished. Deleted. I opened the system log and searched the sender history. The IP address traced back to the communications department. Her department. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Of course. I looked at the clock, 12:03 a.m. I could have given up right then. No one would have blamed me. But quitting meant letting her win again, and I couldn't stomach that. I rolled my chair closer to the desk, cracked my knuckles, and started typing. Line by line, I worked through the night. I didn't stop for coffee or food. Just water and determination. By the time dawn colored the blinds pale orange, the document was finished, formatted, and triple-checked. I printed the final version, placed it in a folder, and slipped it into my bag. The bus ride to the office felt longer than usual. The city was just waking up, commuters half asleep, the smell of damp asphalt in the air. I watched people getting off at their stops, each carrying their own quiet battles. When I arrived, the building lights flickered on floor by floor as the sun rose behind it. I went straight to the mailroom. The hallway was empty except for one security guard who nodded good morning. I took a pen from my pocket and wrote something on the back of the manuscript before sliding it into the internal mail slot marked Executive Review. This is the last time I let someone else decide my due date. By 7:59, the folder was delivered. The deadline met. My shoulders relaxed for the first time in hours. At 8 sharp, Callista walked in wearing a cream-colored dress and her usual arrogance. She saw me standing near the elevator, and our eyes met briefly. "Rough night?" she asked, feigning sympathy. "Productive," I said simply. She smiled thinly. "You always did work too hard for too little." "Some of us prefer earning what we have," I replied. For once, she didn't have a comeback. I didn't wait for her to find one. I turned and walked away, heading to the janitorial closet to grab my supplies for the day. My hands were steady now. Every motion felt deliberate, every breath controlled. When I clocked out that evening, exhaustion hit all at once. I walked the 2 blocks home, the sky dimming to violet. My apartment smelled faintly of rain again, that mix of dust and damp air that reminded me of something clean trying to push through the grime. I dropped my bag on the couch and stared at the wall where my medal hung. Then I pulled a small notepad from my purse and wrote a single line on a sticky note. "Callista, line 1 crossed. 3 to go." I pinned it next to the medal. The quiet felt heavier tonight, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting. The note on the wall stared back at me all week, Callista's name written in sharp ink, a warning to myself that I wasn't finished. I saw it every morning before work and every night before bed, a quiet promise I didn't say out loud. The paper had started to curl at the corners, but I left it there, a reminder that lines had been crossed and there was no going back. Saturday afternoon came with rain. The kind that doesn't roar, just whispers against the windows. I was cleaning out the small storage closet in my apartment when I found an old cardboard box marked, "Dad's Stuff." It was wedged behind my mother's extra oxygen supplies. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it. Inside were little fragments of another life, his reading glasses, a fountain pen, a folded handkerchief that still faintly smelled of sandalwood. Beneath all that sat an old answering machine. The kind with tiny cassette tapes. I plugged it into the wall, fingers trembling a little, not sure why. I pressed rewind, then play. Static first. Then his voice. "You were born with a gift, baby girl. Don't wait for permission to use it." My breath caught. I hadn't heard him speak in years, not since the hospital. His voice was warm and sure, the way it always had been when I was small and the world felt safe. I hit rewind again. Listened. Then again. The tape clicked each time, and I didn't care. He'd said those words the day I showed him my first translation, a paragraph from a Chinese poem we'd studied together. "You see how one symbol can hold a whole world," he'd told me. "Never let anyone steal that from you." I looked around the room. Everything suddenly felt smaller. It was past 4 when my phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Callista's stopping by. She's bringing dinner. You should come too, sweetie." I closed my eyes for a second, steadying my breath. I didn't want to go. But I knew if I didn't, Callista would use my absence as another story to tell later. By 6, I was at Mom's apartment. The smell of garlic bread and reheated pasta filled the air. Callista was already there, setting the table like she owned the place. She looked up when I entered. "Wow," she said lightly. "Didn't think you'd make it. Busy scrubbing boardroom floors?" "Nice to see you too," I said, hanging my coat. Mom clapped her hands softly. "Girls, please. Sit down. I'm so happy you're both here." We sat, me at one end, Callista at the other, the the distance between us thick with things we'd never said. Callista poured herself wine and raised her glass. To family. I didn't drink. To honesty, I said instead. Her smile faltered just a little. You always did ruin a good toast. I let it go. For Mom's sake. But the moment Mom excused herself to get dessert, I leaned forward. You can lie to them. To her. Even to the board. But you can't lie to history. Callista's eyebrows arched, amusement curling her lips. You sure about that? You even sure you're part of it? The room went still. What are you talking about? I asked quietly. She swirled her wine. We never did prove you were his, did we? My stomach dropped. Mom reappeared in the doorway, holding a tray of plates. Her hands shook, and one glass slipped, shattering against the floor. Mom! I jumped up. It's okay, don't move. She looked from one of us to the other, her eyes full of confusion. What's going on? Nothing, Callista said smoothly. Just sister talk. But I couldn't breathe. I crouched to pick up the shards, my hands trembling. Why would you say that? She stood, unfazed. Because it's true. He never filed the birth certificate himself, did he? And you look nothing like him. I straightened slowly, glass pieces in my palm. Get out. She laughed softly. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. I'm just reminding you of the facts. Mom's too fragile to face it, but deep down, I think she knows. Mom's lips parted, a faint whisper, Callista, stop. But Callista didn't. She leaned close to me and said quietly, you've been clinging to his name like it makes you somebody. Maybe it doesn't. I didn't answer. I just turned away, heart pounding. When she finally left, the apartment fell silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. Mom tried to speak, but I stopped her. It's okay, I said, forcing a smile. You should rest. I helped her to her bedroom, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. Then I walked into mine and shut the door. The drawer under my bed still held the envelope. I pulled it out, sat on the edge of the mattress, and stared at the printed words, DNA test kit, confidential. I remembered the day he gave it to me. I'd been 16, furious after one of Callista's tantrums, shouting that I wasn't really part of the family. Dad had come into my room, placed the envelope on my desk, and said, you don't need this, Azura. But if they ever make you doubt, keep it. I ran my thumb over the flap. I could open it. I could know. But I didn't. I know who I am, I whispered. And I don't need paperwork to prove it. I slid the envelope back into the drawer and closed it firmly. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping against the window like fingertips. After a while, I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. The comparison file was still on the screen, rows of yellow highlights showing every word Callista had stolen. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everything she'd tried to erase. I opened a new document and typed the title, Timeline of Theft, Phase 1. One by one, I listed every instance I could remember, the presentation she'd stolen, the report she'd altered, the recognition she'd accepted in my name. Each date, each document. It was tedious, but it steadied me. When I finished, I sat back and reread it. The evidence wasn't perfect yet, but it was enough to start something. I saved the file and backed it up twice, one copy on my laptop, one on an external drive. It was almost midnight. I turned off the desk lamp and stood to stretch, every muscle aching from tension. I crossed the room to turn off the light, when the laptop chimed, a new email. The subject line read, Internal Language Team Audit Request, Urgent. I froze, then clicked it open. The message was short and signed. We've reviewed discrepancies in several translation submissions. Please be prepared to discuss authorship tomorrow morning. My eyes lingered on the timestamp. Sent 10 minutes ago. I stared at the screen and, slowly, a smile crept across my face. Finally, I whispered. Someone's listening. The message on my screen kept pulsing like a heartbeat, Internal Language Team Audit Request, Urgent. I stared at it for a while, the glow of the monitor painting my face pale blue. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was something colder. Satisfaction. After everything, after all the quiet humiliation and stolen work, someone had finally noticed. By morning, the rain had cleared. Charlotte looked scrubbed clean under a pale winter sun. I called out of my morning janitorial shift, said I wasn't feeling well. For once, I didn't feel guilty about it. I ironed a blouse that hadn't seen daylight in years, black slacks, small gold earrings. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I finally looked like someone who was done hiding. Before heading to the office, I stopped at a cafe downtown. The place was almost empty, a few retirees reading newspapers, the hiss of milk frothing behind the counter. In the back corner sat Juno Caro, the woman who had once worked alongside my father before the restructuring. She looked up as I approached, her gray hair pulled neatly back, her eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. "You look just like him," she said, smiling softly. "The same eyes when you're about to make trouble." "Trouble's overdue," I said. She chuckled and slid a small flash drive across the table. "He asked me to hold on to this before he left the company. Said it was only for you, when you were ready." My fingers brushed the cool metal of the drive. "What's on it?" "An email backup from Alden Blackstone, the founder. Before he passed." She reached into her bag again and handed me a folded printout. "Read it when you're alone." I opened it, eyes tracing the faint signature at the bottom of the page. "Azra has the linguistic mind this company will one day depend on. Keep her protected." Attached beneath it were handwritten notes, technical annotations, my father's handwriting identifying me as the contributor for their first Mandarin project. I swallowed hard. "They erased me." "They tried," she corrected gently. "But your father built his work like he built you, sooner or later, the truth shines through." I met her gaze. "I'm not hiding anymore." "Then don't," she said simply. When I left the cafe, my reflection in the window looked steadier. My hands didn't shake. I walked the 10 blocks to Reeves Enterprises with the flash drive in my coat pocket, each step heavier but more certain than the last. By the time I reached the building, employees were filing in, coffee cups in hand, conversations buzzing about the audit meeting. No one looked at me twice. Good. Let them underestimate me one more time. Upstairs, the boardroom gleamed like always, too much glass, too much ego. Through the transparent walls, I saw Callista at the head of the table, smiling for her audience. She wore cream and gold, like she was hosting a talk show. Her assistant adjusted her notes. She didn't notice me step in. The chair of the board cleared his throat. "Let's get started. Ms. Varelli, I understand you'll be presenting the final report." She rose, voice smooth and rehearsed. "Yes, I'd like to begin by walking everyone through the executive summary." That was my cue. I pushed open the door and walked inside. The sound of my heels on the marble floor made her pause mid-sentence. Heads turned. "Miss Delaney," the chair said, confused. "This is an internal audit meeting. Staff aren't." With respect, I interrupted, "I was invited." Callista's smile tightened. "By who?" "By the truth," I said simply. I placed my folder on the table, next to hers. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to clarify a few cultural and technical errors in this report." The room went dead quiet. One executive shifted in his chair. "Are you qualified to?" "Qualified?" I met his eyes. "I wrote the original document." Gasps. Even Callista's mask slipped for half a second. "Let her speak," said Juno from the back of the room. I hadn't seen her slip in, but she was there, arms crossed, watching everything. Callista turned to the chair. "This is ridiculous. She's a janitor." I smiled slightly. "A janitor who speaks 4 languages and holds a degree your department conveniently ignored." The chair gestured cautiously. "Proceed." I opened my folder. On page 4, the term 集成系统was mistranslated as assembled model. It actually means integrated framework, which changes the entire proposal. And on page 6, Liudong Moxing, the phrase used for the manufacturing method, was misread as staff rotation. That mistake alone could cost you millions. A murmur rippled through the table. I clicked the remote and projected the annotated version onto the screen. Line by line, I walked them through the original document, shifting seamlessly between Mandarin, Spanish, and English. My father's notes aligned with mine, the proof undeniable. When I finished, I looked around the table. You don't need to know who translated this. You just need to know that someone in this company did, and didn't need a corner office to do it. For a full minute, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector fan. The chair finally said, "Ms. Delaney, these corrections, are they verified?" By the source company in Beijing, I replied. And by your founder, Alden Blackstone, in his archived correspondence. Juno stepped forward and handed the printed email to the chair. Signed and dated, she said. He read it, his eyes narrowing. This could have legal implications. Callista stood abruptly. This is absurd. She's making things up, fabricating old documents to discredit me. I looked at her, calm. Fabrication implique création. I don't need to create what already exists. The chair raised a hand. That's enough for now. We'll review the documentation and reconvene. Callista glared at me. You think this changes anything? It already has, I said quietly. When the meeting ended, the executives filed out, whispering to one another. The air felt different, like the moment before a storm breaks. Callista caught up to me in the hallway, her voice sharp. You're overreaching, Azura. You have no formal position here. I turned to face her fully. And yet here I am. Speaking for myself. Finally. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once, she didn't have words to twist. Juno appeared beside me, slipping her phone into her purse. You should head home, she said softly. Rest. You've just changed the entire conversation. I'm not sure what happens next, I admitted. Neither are they, she said. And that's good. I nodded, thanking her. By evening, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving a quiet exhaustion. I stopped by a small diner near my apartment, ordered a cup of soup I barely tasted, then walked home through the cold. The city felt different tonight, not kinder, but clearer. When I got home, I set the flash drive on my desk and turned on the lamp. The room glowed golden, the soft hum of the fridge in the background. I should have felt relief, but my mind was still racing. Somewhere downtown, Callista was probably pacing, planning her next move. But this time, she'd have to do it knowing that I could speak, and that people were finally listening. My phone buzzed just as I was about to turn off the light. Juno's name flashed across the screen. I answered. Hey. Azura, she said, her voice calm but serious. You might want to sit down. I frowned. What's going on? I just got off a call with a senior board member. She paused. They said, and I quote, we need to discuss Azura Delaney and what role she should play moving forward. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then, slowly, I smiled. Guess they finally remembered I exist. Sweetheart, she said with a laugh, they'll never forget you again. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. The lamplight caught the edge of my father's old pen sitting beside the laptop. I picked it up, turned it between my fingers, and whispered to the empty room, you told me to use my gift, Dad. Looks like I finally did. When I hung up with Juno, I didn't move from my seat for a long time. The phrase she'd relayed, we need to discuss Azura Delaney and what role she should play moving forward, echoed through my mind like a bell that refused to stop ringing. The idea that I might finally be seen not as a placeholder, not as Callista's little sister or some invisible fixture in the background, but as someone of consequence, it stirred something in me I hadn't felt in a long time, anticipation. I poured a glass of water, took a slow sip, and sat at my desk to draft follow-up notes. Just as I reached for my mouse, another email appeared in my inbox. From anonymous@reevesenterprises.com. Subject, you might want to see this. Security footage. 7:47 a.m. Tuesday. I stared at it for a moment. Then clicked. A simple video player loaded. No attachments, no text. Just a time-stamped clip from the conference room camera. The one outside the boardroom. I hit play. There she was. Callista. She walked into the room confidently, latte in hand, her phone tucked under her chin. She glanced toward the stack of papers on the table, my translation. I recognized the exact formatting, the red paperclip I always used. Then she did it. Without hesitation, she tipped her coffee over the papers. The audio wasn't crystal clear, but the words came through. Smug. Loud enough to be intentional. Illiterate janitor. The recording ended. I sat back, heart pounding, not with shame this time, but something sharper. Cleaner. Resolve. I didn't forward the clip. I didn't send it to HR or blast it to every department. Instead, I copied it to a secure folder and opened the presentation I'd been preparing for next week's company town hall, a slide deck on internal diversity and talent equity. I retitled the presentation, Respecting Internal Talent, Why You're Losing Us. At the end of the final slide, I embedded the video. No commentary. No accusation. Just a play button. Let them draw their own conclusions. Town hall day arrived quicker than expected. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, more filled than usual. Rumors were swirling. Callista, oddly, wasn't there. I'd heard she was in a private strategy meeting with the board, likely trying to control the fire before it spread. I sat in the back row. No assigned seat. No spotlight. The room dimmed. The first few speakers went through the usual motions: financial updates, employee engagement stats, sustainability goals. Then came the HR lead segment, internal growth and retention. My heart thudded as my presentation came up. My name wasn't on it. I hadn't asked for credit. But slide by slide, the story unfolded: data-backed statistics on internal promotions, staff undervaluation, testimonials from unseen voices in the company. Then the final slide appeared. A single button, play. The clip rolled. The room fell so still, it felt like gravity had thickened. Gasps. Then silence. Then whispers. Phones went up. People recorded. Some looked at one another, stunned. Others looked toward the exit as if Callista might appear and explain herself. She didn't. When the lights came back up, the presenter didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The clip had spoken loud enough. I left the auditorium quietly, stepping into the hallway just as the buzz inside reached fever pitch. I didn't need applause. I didn't need outrage. I only needed truth to be seen. Later that afternoon, the company hosted a luncheon to welcome key partners. I had been invited in my new capacity as a consultant for cross-cultural communication, a role created days after the board meeting. The room was sleek, modern, buzzing with polite networking energy. I grabbed a soda, kept to myself, and found a corner near a window. Then I heard my name. Azura. You made it. I turned. HR's director was smiling, motioning someone toward me. A man stepped forward. Tall. Crisp gray suit. Familiar jawline. Silas Mercer. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the breakup. Not since the night he'd told me, I can't build a future with someone who has no plan. He looked like he'd walked out of a corporate recruitment video. Callista's voice rang out behind him. Azura, meet the man I told you was too good to lose. She was clinging to his arm, her smile sharp and smug. She looked beautiful. Calculated. I blinked once. Then smiled. He was never too good to lose, I said, raising my glass casually. Just too scared to grow. Her smile faltered. Silas opened his mouth as if to respond, then shut it again. He looked stunned, like a man who'd walked into the wrong story and didn't recognize the plot anymore. I took a sip of my drink and turned back to the window. The skyline looked different now. Less distant. I heard someone murmur behind me. Did she just? Yes. I had. A few guests nodded toward me. One offered a nod of respect. Another gave a polite smile that felt genuine. Callista, still frozen beside Silas, said nothing. It was enough. I didn't stay long. I thanked the organizers, slipped out the side door, and caught a ride home. The sun was setting by the time I reached my apartment. Golden light spilled across the carpet. I kicked off my shoes, sat on the couch, and let the quiet settle. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. New message: we're calling an emergency vote. The seat Callista holds may not be hers much longer. I stared at the screen, then at the ceiling. That seat, the one she built her entire identity on. The one she said I'd never reach. And now? It might have my name on it. I held the pen tightly between my fingers, its smooth barrel suddenly foreign in my grip. Everything around me had slowed, the murmurs, the rustle of papers, the shuffle of polished shoes against carpet. It was as if the world paused the moment the nameplate changed. Chairwoman, Azura Delaney. Those words weren't just engraved on a strip of brushed brass. They'd carved something deeper into me. Something permanent. I looked up from the form I'd just signed and met the eyes of every board member seated around the long mahogany table. Some looked stunned. A few nodded respectfully. And one, an older gentleman with a blue tie and trembling hands, stood first. Then another. And another. They all rose. I didn't expect that. Callista had once told me, "You can scrub floors forever, Azura, but nobody stands for a janitor. Yet here they were. Standing. Not for a title. For me. Let's begin, I said, folding the document neatly and placing it before me. The chair meeting continued, but honestly, I only remember fragments. People spoke. Some congratulated me cautiously, others tried to align themselves early, like leaves shifting in the wind. But my focus stayed still. There was no celebration inside me yet, only a stillness. The kind that comes after you've stopped bracing for impact. Hours later, the boardroom emptied. I remained in my seat for a few quiet moments. My fingertips brushed the edges of the table, the surface glossy and cold. The same table where Callista once spilled coffee on my work and laughed. Where she said illiterate janitor and no one blinked. Where I once stood at the edge, invisible. Now I was at the head of it. But some stains don't wipe away that easily. That evening, I took the long way home. The city was transitioning from gold to blue, that strange hour when the world held its breath before night fully claimed it. I passed the bus stop where I used to wait in my janitor uniform, earbuds in, hood up. People used to glance past me like I wasn't even there. Now they looked at me differently. Was it the way I walked? The clothes? Or had something deeper shifted? As I approached my building, my phone buzzed. A message from HR, Callista's termination paperwork is being finalized. You're not expected to comment. Just sign off if asked. I didn't answer right away. I needed time. When I reached my apartment, the hallway smelled like takeout and someone's overused lavender plug-in. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood in the quiet. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. The post-it on the wall, Callista, line 1 crossed. 3 to go. I peeled it off slowly. She was gone now. Publicly, permanently. That line didn't need counting anymore. I poured a glass of water, took a seat on the couch, and let the quiet soak in. It didn't last. My phone buzzed again. This time, a different number. Unknown. Azura, the voice on the other end said. We're holding a company-wide meeting tomorrow. A formal transition announcement. You'll be introduced as interim chairwoman. I took a beat. Understood. The voice hesitated. Callista. Didn't take it well. I didn't need to ask what that meant. I'll be there, I said, ending the call. The next morning came fast. My alarm rang before the sun. I got dressed in a navy suit, modest, strong, and pinned my father's old lapel pin to the collar. He wore it to every negotiation. Said it reminded him of what mattered, consistency, clarity, dignity. At the building entrance, I passed through security like I'd done for years. Except now, I didn't show a badge. I was escorted. Every eye in the lobby followed me as I crossed toward the elevators. Inside the boardroom again, I stood behind the podium. The room was packed, department heads, media liaisons, regional partners. I scanned the crowd. Callista wasn't there. She'd been stripped of her access the night before. HR had confirmed it. Her keycard wouldn't open the doors anymore. Still, I half expected her to burst in. Instead, I saw Silas in the back. No tie this time. Just a pale face and eyes that didn't know where to land. He didn't speak. Just looked at me like he was realizing too late what he'd walked away from. The board chair approached the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, he said. Today marks a new chapter. He gestured to me. Please welcome Chairwoman Azura Delaney. Polite applause. Nothing thunderous, nothing flashy. Just enough to say we see you now. I stepped forward. I'll keep this brief, I began. Because the work ahead doesn't need more noise, it needs action. I looked around the room. Some of you know me. Most of you don't. That's okay. Because the goal isn't to be known. It's to be useful. A pause. I didn't come here through legacy. I came through labor. The kind that gets overlooked. The kind that wipes the tables and files the paperwork and answers the late-night calls. The kind you don't clap for, but that keeps the lights on. I saw a few heads nod. Even a few tears. I've seen how easily talent is ignored when it doesn't come in a familiar package. I've seen what happens when stories are rewritten to erase the truth. A beat. And I'm here to make sure that stops. Silence followed, thick and reverent. I ended simply. Let's work. After the meeting, people approached me, not in waves, but one by one. Handshakes. Thank yous. A few confessions. I saw what she did to you, one man muttered. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I looked him in the eye. You can start speaking now. That night, I returned home with tired feet but a steady heart. I sat on the floor by my window, looking out over the city. There would still be battles. People wouldn't suddenly stop judging or underestimating me. But now, I had a seat at the table. Not because someone pulled out a chair, but because I built it myself. The applause had faded. The lights in the boardroom dimmed. But as I walked back through the hallway that had once felt too narrow, too loud, too full of people who never looked me in the eye, I could feel the shift. This time, people saw me. A few years ago, I used to carry cleaning supplies down this same corridor, quietly, avoiding conversations, making myself smaller. Now, as I passed by those same offices, I heard something different. Good morning, Chairwoman. Morning, Ms. Delaney. The words weren't shouted, and I didn't need them to be. It was the sincerity that caught me off guard. Respect, not pity. I nodded to each one, never stopping too long. I didn't need the spotlight, and I didn't want to hover in gratitude for something I had always deserved. At the end of the hallway, I paused beside the new plaque I'd ordered last week. It wasn't big. Just a brushed metal square mounted on a stone wall. A quiet tribute. In honor of those who were always here, even when we didn't see them. I placed my palm gently against the cool surface. Not for show. Just a moment for myself. Downstairs, the HR department finalized the paperwork. Callista was no longer part of Reeves Enterprises. I hadn't demanded revenge. I didn't need to. She tried to erase me and in doing so, erased herself. Rumors buzzed like gnats around the building, something about misused budget reports, falsified project claims, manipulation of staff records. It didn't matter anymore. Whether she'd face a legal consequence or just the long silence of being discredited professionally, I wouldn't be the one chasing her downfall. Callista released a public statement the next morning. I've chosen to part ways with Reeves Enterprises due to internal shifts that no longer align with my vision for leadership. No one cared. It didn't trend. No reposts. No angry defense threads. She was gone, and the world moved on faster than she ever imagined possible. But silence is its own kind of justice. Still, not everything was resolved neatly. A few days after the announcement, I visited my mother. I hadn't seen her in person since the vote, and I didn't want her to hear about it secondhand. I brought her favorite soup from the corner diner and fresh lilies from the market she used to love. When I walked into her small apartment, she was sitting in her chair, watching an old black and white movie. The volume was up too high. I turned it down, gently. She looked up, eyes lighting with recognition, but then, hesitation. You're doing great, Callus, Azura, she said. I smiled softly and sat beside her. It's okay, Mom. She reached for her tea, and I helped her steady the cup. Her hands were thinner now, the skin delicate like tissue. We didn't talk about the vote. Or the company. Or Callista. I just sat with her, and for once, the quiet didn't ache as much as it used to. Love remains, even when names slip. That night, back in my office, I stayed late. The city outside was soft with fog, the glass of my window clouded with breath. I looked around the space that was now mine. The polished walnut desk. The framed degrees on the wall, mine, now visible. I opened the top drawer slowly. Inside, tucked next to a leather notebook, sat two things. The coffee-stained paper from that awful morning. And my father's old fountain pen. I unfolded the paper. The stain had faded over time, but the memory hadn't. I could still see the coffee pour out. The sneer on her face. The laughter that followed. But now, I saw something else in it. Proof that I had survived. I uncapped the pen and wrote on a clean page. Not every stain is a failure. Some are reminders of what we survived. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into a new envelope. On the front, I wrote, to the next one they try to erase. There would be another. Another Azura. Another name quietly swept under meetings and emails and polished shoes. But maybe this time, they wouldn't have to rise alone. The next morning, we launched a new initiative, the Hidden Talent Project. It started with a single conversation in the break room. A janitor named Raul told me he used to be a civil engineer in Mexico City. A cafeteria worker, Deshawn, spoke 5 languages and used to teach French literature. We gathered their stories. printed them, posted them across the company's website. For every position overlooked, for every talent buried beneath someone else's spotlight, we handed them a microphone. We offered mentorship, internal mobility, professional training. And slowly, the company shifted. People started seeing more than uniforms. They saw potential. My father used to say, justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. He was right. I wasn't here to destroy what hurt me. I was here to rebuild what should have protected me in the first place. At the end of the week, I returned to the hallway where the plaque hung. A new nameplate had been installed just above my office door. Not engraved in gold. Not oversized. Simple. Strong. Azura Delaney, Chairwoman. The name they forgot. Now on every door. Sometimes, the people who dismiss you the loudest are the ones most afraid of what you might become. Azura's story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming space, voice, and worth in a world that tried to erase her. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Or had to stay quiet just to survive? Share your story in the comments.